Colleagues, welcome everyone to the Business Regulation Subcommittee. We are here because our chairman does not like us and he's going to make us do whatever we can to kill us on this bill. So just wanted to get started. Laura, let us know where we left off.
Okay.
Take your time, Laura. We're good.
So I think that the best place to start would be back with the leave. At the end, we started discussing the leave provision of the bill that's left, but I think that we should, with fresh eyes, look at it.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so looks like the vice chair is not with us.
Not yet.
Not yet, but she has offered, an amendment that brings in part of House Bill 1326.
Can I ask you what page you on, please, so I can get on board?
Yes, we're on page 18.
18. Okay, 18.
And just for clarification, Laura, some of the things you're trying to bring in were already in the bill prior to restriking them, correct? The 14
right.
leave?
So yes, the 14 days of leave was in this bill.
And I'm not really understanding why we're taking a second bite at that apple. We had discussed 5 days. I haven't heard the rationale as to why we had already brought it down from 14 to 5. I understand the reason and the rationale for the 14. I just also understood the fiscal implications of 14. As I explained to the vice chair, if we know that the state is willing to reimburse these business owners for this extra 14 days leave, I don't think anybody would have a problem. I know that financially, that's almost impossible. And since we're talking about a bill that might actually take effect, since it's an emergency bill right now, that's basically giving everybody who's working right now additional 14 days of paid leave. We had originally brought that down to 5. I don't know why we're bumping it back up to 14 and discussing it again. When again, and I guess it's open for discussion. Is that the first part you want to discuss, Laura, or am I jumping the gun?
No, I mean, I think that's what matters is how much.
Right. And I think because before we get into the details, colleagues, I wanted to talk about again, because we started and I knew just financially, just like that would be impossible for the state to remunerate to each of the business owners, it would be impossible for the business owners. So we had tried to look at a number like 5 plus the 2 weekdays would give you 7, plus your sick leave would give you 14 or more. So I guess the question is now, why would we deviate back up to 14 without any financial guarantee from the state or the feds? I understand that the advocates want it. I understand the reason we set that timeline out, i.e. the CDC, but what I don't understand is the fiscal responsibility that we will be, as soon as this bill passes, we'll be dropping on the laps of every business owner in the state, and how possible.
Okay, I mean, I think you can perhaps do a caveat that suggests that, this is provided that there are state and or federal funds.
I mean, well, and Vice Chair,
whatever, but yeah.
Vice Chair, I mean, honestly, if that's something that we can get through leadership, I mean, I know the Republicans may have a problem with it. I don't see what the problem is. But the only thing my worry is, if there's not, then are we saying there is no leave available? Because I just don't want to burden anybody unduly.
I think what it would be saying is that unfortunately, I mean, like I said, I would like to just obviously move it forward, but I get it. And certainly as a business owner myself, I get it. But, I think if there's at least the caveat that, if there's state and federal funds available, and if there's not, then I think it's not an obligation, but it's certainly, there's probably a way to sort of suggest that we hope businesses would do what they could to comply with CDC regulations or CDC recommendations, regarding. And again, I think most businesses did. I mean, I know mine did, without even necessarily knowing what we were going to get or not get.
Right.
You want to make your workplace safe. So I think we can write some sort of legislative, I don't want to call it intent, but, aspirational goal sort of case.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I'm
I'll stop
confused.
talking. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Lily.
So I'm confused. I'm looking at this reprint that says, it crossed out 14 days and says at least 40 hours. So that's
Right.
14 days.
But what we did not do, we didn't include what the drafter, what Laura did is she went back to the original 5. The reason we're discussing the 14 days was that was in the original bill. You dropped it down to 5, but our vice chair brought the amendment back in because she also doesn't like me to try to discuss the 14. I do appreciate, and I do get behind her suggestion of if there are state and federal funds available, that as a caveat. So that number, that 40 hours was me striking the original 14 days in. I think it was 117 hours. I don't know what the
112, which was 14 days. Yeah.
Right. So if we go back to that number and the caveat, if the federal or state funds are available, I believe that's about as fair as we're going to get. Chris, I know you had your hand up, but Lily, did you have any more questions?
No, so if that's the sentiment, why don't we just put that language in there?
Well, right, and I mean that's what we kind of discussed yesterday with the vice chair. Yeah, that creates a whole new. Now, granted, I understand the business owners would have issue because, well, during that 14 days, that person is vacant, the production level drops. But this is during an emergency. This is during a pandemic. I just wanted to give Chris and possibly Seth or Mark some input if they wanted it on. How do you guys feel about the 14 with the caveat of the state or the feds, basically.
Well, I'm under no illusion that step 2 would just be mandating that funding be available through state dollars, even if no federal dollars are available. So I would be against it.
Wait, no, that's not.
That's certainly phase 2.
What?
Spent
Phase
more than
2.
5 minutes in Annapolis knows that.
All right.
What?
You're kind of coming off. You're coming in hot, Seth. I don't understand.
Well, no, that's just the way I feel. Like it's like, okay, 14 days. Only if federal and state dollars are available to reimburse the businesses. 2 years from now, will be. I just, as a business owner, I feel like a year now or 2 years from now, phase 2 will be. No, we're doing 14 days. If federal dollars aren't available, too bad. We're going to redo. We're going to come to business legislation, and then we're going to do 14 days. And it's going to be mandated either 50/50 match or state funding, or eventually my concern is that we will be at 14 days and it will be on the shoulders of business.
I got you. So you're like the nose under the camel's nose under the tent.
I mean, I don't know about all that. I these things evolve, and that's.
Well, they don't have to, because that's why we're here.
Well,
yeah.
They do, because we're here also. I mean, there's a whole other argument you can make with that too.
Okay, go.
So CT, here's my take on this. Just like when the federal government gave us tax credits for people that needed to take leave, as a business owner, that is, from a policy standpoint, the right way to do it. If the state's going to mandate it, then fund the mandate. The concern I would have as a policymaker, surely on your side of the street, you're probably thinking, what's the fiscal note going to be on that? Because what's likely to happen is, at the same time we're saying in legislation that we're going to fund, paid leave, the federal government may do the same thing. And so this is where I get to my concern about, are we stacking federal benefits on top of what the state's offering, or is what we're doing in lieu of if the federal government doesn't offer it? And that if we don't have to spend money as a state because the federal government's already providing it, then my question is, why would you even broach a subject? But I think the intent is honorable, because at least in this particular conversation, we're trying to fund the mandate, right?
Okay,
So,
and I see so like right now, there's no more FFRC. I think that's
FFCRA.
Yeah.
FFCRA. So right now, like I said, since this is emergency legislation, something happens at your place of employment, your employees will no longer be able to take advantage of that, total 12 weeks that they can take off, and you will be dollar for dollar. I don't know if it's dollar for dollar, if you're just giving credit tax-wise, I forgot which one it is, but we're basically saying that doesn't exist right now. So now what do we do?
well, can I just say this to you? I believe that there is a declaration that my business has to make as to whether or not we're going to continue offering the federal benefit. So I haven't made that declaration yet, but I might want to share with you the email that we have as it relates to this federal tax credit. So it's almost like they're saying to me as businesses, I wasn't prepared for this, Chairman, but how about if I forward to you and to committee what businesses are having to do? Because you're right, it's expiring.
Right.
I believe that they're giving us, if we as a business want to continue offering the federal leave if they need it, then we can still avail ourselves of the tax credit. If on the other hand, we just don't as a business want to extend that benefit, then we have to declare that, and then we don't get the benefit of taking a tax credit if the worker has to leave, right? I wish I had that. I wish I was ready for that and I wasn't. So.
Okay,
Well,
I get your
guess
point.
the only thing-
Go ahead, Laura.
The only thing I was just going to say is the subcommittee yesterday, I think, made the policy decision that this would not be for the current pandemic. So the
I'm not
conversation.
sure that was the
Yeah, and
exact.
I think we have to back off of that because that might not be true, especially in light of this being emergency legislation. So I don't know if we can call that just yet, Laura. I thought that
Okay.
it may not be. So
I mean, I
knowing
think
that
we
this-
all agree it's perspective, that this
Right.
has not got a retroactive piece to it.
Right.
I
But
don't know that
then-
we,
Okay, I
But
thought
it
you all
would
had
be
agreed. it would
retroactive
not
in that
be
it would be
provided
active during this
current
pandemic.
that doesn't make it retroactive, Seth. At least face the camera when you're angry. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have it now. Under the new American Rescue Plan of 2021 that was signed into law on March 11th, they further extend the ability to receive tax credits for employers who voluntarily continue to provide FFCRA leave from April 1st through September 30th, 2021. And then they go into provisions. It's going to take too much time for subcommittee, but it looks like to me I have to decide this by tomorrow, by Friday, as a business, which means all businesses have to make this declaration. The new law actually extends the benefit out. Think about that as we're saying as a state, we do the same.
I totally get your point. And colleagues, his point is FFRC is, I think, 10 and 2, right? Chris, it's up that people can take paid at 70%, I believe. But I don't think it's full pay, but you can basically, if you can't make arrangements for childcare because the schools are closed, you know, anything of that nature, you could take this leave. You have sick family in addition. So what I guess Chris is pointing out, are we going to give them an additional 14 days on top of the FFRC if that's currently available to individuals? Just how stacking?
I say no.
Clearly, I got you. And I get your point. Mr. Chairman, did you have a question?
No, finish your thing, and then I just had a comment after, but I wanted to wait till you were finished.
Okay, so so his point was how much leave in total, and I will say this: I've had several constituents in my county that have abused the hell out of that FFRC. That workers have taken it, even and as soon as they got done, you know, it's like they went and got another job where they could work full time, even though they couldn't work full time because they had one child who was in school and schools were closed. Meaning, I do understand having caution with making sure we don't just lay it out there very simply. So I don't know how we could possibly draft it. Is it saying if they're just say that if the federal government federal state government provides these additional dollars, then we can allow this leave, one, but also draft in there and no other programs made available.
right, yeah, federal programs
it's
would
like-
preempt, right.
It's like yeah. And are we going to say that for any federal programs would preempt this 14 days?
Yeah, I think you could do that. I mean, if
think
it's,
the way you would say it is whether the leave runs concurrently. If the intent is that the federal leave would run concurrently with this, that means that you can't take it consecutively.
correct.
Well, we want it to, if they have, right. Well, then we run into that consecutive. Right. Like I said, do they take one and then are we saying they take the other? Because I would assume that, as the vice chair said, that this would be preempted by any federal leave programs provided.
What do you mean preempted?
Meaning if
It
they
means
provide
federal
some-
would come first. You'd have to, if there's a federal program, that's what we go under. If there's no federal program, we'll go into the state.
then we go into the state 14 days, meaning, but not concurrent, not consecutive, meaning I don't want them to run the federal program and then they
Correct.
14 days. That would be a lot of leave. So,
Correct.
so as Chris pointed out, if this FFRCA is still available, am I saying that right? Is
Close enough. We know what you
FFCRA,
mean.
FFCR, okay.
Families First Coronavirus Relief Act.
Okay, if the FFCRA is now available again, then the 14 days of leave would not take effect. And if you're somebody like Chris who says, never mind, I don't want that, and there becomes some kind of accident where this person needs to take time off, then that 14 days of leave would then only be available if the state or the feds provided money to reimburse him for that leave.
Mr. Chairman, I forwarded to Laura a private correspondence with my business. At least that'll help her understand what declaration we have to make by tomorrow if we're going to pass a law, just so it meshes with what the federal is going on. Because it looks like to me, I can say, no, I'm not going to voluntarily offer FFCRA, which means if we pass this law, that means if with the funding, that you're going to put the state on the hook for a business's decision not to offer it.
And that was my next question. Where are we going with people that don't elect the FFCRA?
And I haven't decided that yet. I've got till tomorrow. So this is a thing that's happening right now in the business world.
Well, to say we're putting the state on the hook isn't exactly true, because we're only putting the state on the hook if these funds are made available. So it's not that they have to make the funds available, meaning if you decide you don't want to do it, the state's like, yeah, we put our money elsewhere. Well, then the funds aren't available. So that is not, your employee would not be eligible for those 14 days. That's the way I understand the intent and the direction that we're going. Mr. Chair, I know you had some questions. I apologize.
No, I'm good. Please keep going.
Okay. Okay. So to my understanding, Chris.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
To my understanding is that there's no way that we would run afoul of that, because there would have to be funds available in order to, the state would have to voluntarily place themselves on the hook.
Well, someone texted me and made a good point too, that essential workers and the whole essential worker and employer was really under the executive order that indicated there was a stay at home. The stay at home has been lifted. So some of this essential worker piece, I think, and employee really applies when there is a stay at home order. And there's not now. It's not that the safety protocols don't have to be in place. But I think we have to, I don't think the point is this for all time, or is it when there's an executive order in place that says everybody stay home except.
And Madam Chair, Vice Chair, that gets us back to the whole scope of what,
right.
When that's that big step we jumped into yesterday, we have to go back to, is when is it an essential worker? If it's just like right now, are there any essential workers by definition?
Right.
The answer is yes, because we're still under the executive order.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
but everybody
Yes.
can go back to work now.
Exactly.
So are there essential workers, and do we, because now we're getting into a very important, again, the scope of who we're trying to protect.
Right.
And as
We
the
gotta
Vice Chair
bifurcate
said,
those. We gotta
we're trying to
bifurcate
protect the
those
people.
as well.
Seth, are you talking?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't
Okay.
realize I was on speaker.
Okay. What we're trying to do is protect those that have to go to work when nobody else has to, and possibly put themselves in danger. That's the goal. That was the way I envisioned it. So right now, is there anybody that we'd be protecting? I would say no, even though we're still under the governor's proclamation. But by our definition, and I think the goal of this subcommittee, no, right now this wouldn't take effect on anybody because everybody can go to work. And Laura, I know this is a big hill to climb, but that's kind of what we need to be able to do, is narrow that scope down to for the people that are forced to go to work when nobody else can go to work. The people at the grocery stores, the people that are considered essential, you must be their workers. That was the whole goal, is to keep our country running, keep our state running, and keep these people protected. And I think as we broaden it, and man, raise your hand, Seth. Can't just be looking all surly at the camera. But that we can't, I feel like we keep broadening it too much to talk about any and everybody. because essential workers aren't everybody, they're not everybody that's working now. By the definition we're trying to create, I believe we don't have essential workers going on right now. I may be wrong, so I'm willing to hear it. Mr. Chair, do you understand what I was saying?
Not a lick. But I do have a question. Are there any points and admittedly, I'm late to the dance here with you guys, and that was by design. Are there any areas where you all agree or I mean, what it sounds like this is that we could be hopelessly deadlocked on this point, and I don't want, well, I don't know if it's the best use of time to keep going round and round on this, just on this particular point at the expense of anything or everything else. I guess what I'm trying to find out is if we're pretty much hopelessly deadlocked on the majority of the stuff, in which case that's
we come a long way, Mr. Chair. And in fact, I think that with Madam Vice Chair's caveat for the 14 days, even that's amenable. It may not be perfect. Again, we're not going to let the perfection be good here. But I think but one thing I do think that we do need to get right is the scope. I believe now with the leave is taken care of. I believe we can do the 14 days with the caveat, but the scope would help us alleviate Chris's worry about leave. Like,
what do you mean by the scope? What does that mean?
Because again, we're trying to identify, like right now, who would be considered an essential worker and able to take these 14 days leave right now. And I would think nobody.
Well, no. It would be anybody in the industry or sector that's identified by a state or federal agency as critical. And then it's any worker that can't perform their duties remotely and has to do it at the work site as it appears on the screen. That is, that would still be the case. If you wanted to say, and only when there's a stay-at-home order in effect or something, you could further limit the scope. But as it stands now,
right, Laura. I totally agree with you. I'm saying I don't know if that's our goal, because the whole thing was that for people that have to be out there, we don't want them to, right of refusal, the protecting the work environment. That's for people that have to go into work. And right now, everybody can go into work. I'm closing the door. Sorry about that. Oh, okay. But so again, Madam Vice Chair brought up the point that if we put in there during a mandatory stay-at-home order, that really narrows this scope down of who qualifies for this. Because when there's no stay-at-home order, how are you? I know you're an essential worker, but for the purposes of this bill, why would you be considered an essential worker if everybody can go into work? That's what we're talking about, the scope.
I agree. The scope is where we needed to work on. And I think that's where we struggled yesterday and decided to sort of move on. The question was, are you an essential worker forever? And always, and from the leave perspective, always entitled to this additional leave if there's an emergency. But I think the details of the emergency are also important. And that's where, whether it's, stay at home or, the governor specifically in his proclamation or hers declares these are the essential workers, which in the initial order is what was done. But that piece has been modified, and I actually don't think in the existing order there is anybody that's listed as an essential worker.
Well, what's wrong with
the rest that we've worked on that talks about safety protocols and all of that from a public health emergency is still important.
To everyone.
Believe and who's an essential worker. Yeah.
What's wrong with what y'all? What's wrong with what you all are saying? I mean, granted, not everybody's going to like it, but that's the nature of
nothing.
I don't see anything wrong with what you guys are saying.
When it comes to the leave, and that's what we're talking about, Mr. Chairman, because certain things apply to everyone. Everybody should have the right of refusal, even now, to say, you know what, this isn't right. Whatever's going on here, I'm not going in. Everybody should have that right now. Everybody, and so I don't know if we're stuck on scope again. So do we limit that to just essential workers, or does everybody have the right to not go in to an unhealthy work environment? I would argue everybody has that right. Everybody should have the right of refusal. Every single business, be they essential workers or not, should be following some sort of mandate. The way we've been writing this is just requiring essential employers to do the right thing. We kind of left it open for everyone. That may not be the direction we want to go. And then we can narrowly tailor it to benefits such as leave to focus on individuals during a stay-at-home order who are still required or mandated to go into work. And I think in doing so, we narrow it down. We give all workers rights that they might not currently have, but then we narrow it down to when we define essential workers, we just don't mean people as written down. We talk about people that have to go in, because I thought the chairman's goal was to make sure those folks are protected now and the next time. That's why this is an emergency bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Actually, both chairmans. Derek, may I take a chance at your question? You know, I think that there are basically three components of this bill that matter to the employers. One is, how does the subtitle get applied? I think we developed consensus around how it gets applied because we attached the governor having to do an executive order that causes the subtitle to come into effect. I think that's important from industry side because we don't want this subtitle being applied if there's a snowstorm. All right, so I'm comfortable there. The second part I think we spent a lot of time talking about is, at what point will the state defer to CDC, USDA, OSHA, MOSH? And so I think that the committee, we didn't come to a conclusion as to how we're going to go there, but I think there's general consensus that the state through legislation probably should try as much as possible to defer guidance and also enforcement to those agencies that we currently count on to take care of occupational safety. And then the last component, which we're debating now, is, are we going to provide an additional paid leave to the workers who leave? And if that's going to happen, will the state fund the mandate or will they not? So those are three parts of the bill, which, if it's crafted correctly, and we are doing this bill through the lens of guiding businesses through the pandemic, I find it, I think I'm gonna have a hard time supporting the bill on the House floor, but it appears that the subcommittee's heading in a direction that is much different than where we were when we looked at the bill last fall and into the beginning of sessions. That's my 2 cents on what's happening right now.
I feel the same way.
And thank you guys both for dry snitching. So, but I wanted to say that for the chairman, that he's here, but I do believe that we need to identify basic workers' rights in a health crisis. I further think we need to identify specific rights for those that have to go into work in possibly dangerous conditions. I believe that I'm not sure what the chairman's initial goal was, but that is a goal now to ensure that everybody has these rights, even if you're not designated as an essential worker, because we talk about essential workers, as the vice chair said, only in juxtaposition to a stay-at-home order. But now that the stay-at-home order is laid off, that doesn't mean that the employers don't have to keep providing PPE, that they don't have to keep creating a safe work environment. However, it also means that the individuals shouldn't have any exceptional leave standards because now everybody can go in. And I think that's where I thought we were going. Madam Vice Chair, do you at least?
I think that is, I do think, there's going to be arguments that everybody is essential, even if it's a stay-at-home order, or there are those that, aren't going to have the option, but we cover that in the definition about if you can work at home, you can work at home. But if there's not an order in place that says essential workers have to go to work, but then I think that's sort of where, I think that is where we are. It doesn't mean there won't be federal programs that are applicable to, being able to offer businesses leave, such as the one that Delegate Adams was talking about, that are still going to be in existence. But, the question is, from a state perspective, if we are applying leave, when is it we want to allow the leave to be applied, additional paid leave to be applied to essential workers? I think it's when everybody has to stay home and you are an essential worker that is told you don't have a choice.
Right.
Other than the provisions regarding safe workplaces and, those sorts of things that then we revert back to existing law about right to, what you have to make a complaint, who you call, You know, and from the healthcare perspective, I did talk to Delegate Penny Melnick on the floor today and actually just sent her an email asking her for guidance under the health, you know, maybe their HGO staff council can direct us to sort of health occupations sort of has a similar provisions regarding a safe workplace. So
Right.
you know, I do agree. It's two goals. It's, you know, how do we protect those essential workers when there's a stay-at-home order in place, which I'm sure the advocates are not happy with me for saying it, but I do think that's what we've really been talking about.
Yes.
And then, you know, but at the same time, shoring up in a public health emergency, safe workplaces and employees' ability to leave if the place isn't safe when they follow the protocols we put in place and that are
Right.
in place under the labor article.
Right. So, we're in agreement for the first time, probably ever, but no, we're definitely.
No, we've been pretty good on this, I think.
But I think on this one, we're definitely in agreement that there's kind of a dual goal here, you know, and I think you brought it up very clearly. Delegate Queen, I'm getting ready to get to you now because you look like you have support and say, are you ready?
No, I wasn't rushing you. I'm making choices for something else. So go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. No, I'm fine. So basically, I really want us to be focused on those two goals, making sure we have a scope broad enough to protect every worker, regardless if they're considered essential by the governor or not, if it's at the beginning of a pandemic or right now, that they be able to do what they need to do. The employers know the guidelines they have to follow, whose guidelines they have to follow, even right now, even next week, because this bill is an emergency bill. So once this bill passes, goes into effect, I want to know that they know what they need to do. And if they need to rely on OSHA or is it health department, whoever they need to go to. And again, for individuals there, a stay-at-home order, if things get worse here, because we can always just use this COVID and say, what if things get bad like they did in Italy, where they shut it back down? We're still going to need to keep this state running. How do we keep it running? How do we protect the workers? And that's when the essential, you know, the truly protection for the essential workers takes effect. Now, Delegate Queen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted some clarity, and I think Vice Chairman may has started on that conversation. So when I was listening to my colleague Delegate Adams, and he was talking about what we've gotten through and where we are now, the question I'm having with, and I think part of the confusion for me is there are different categories of why someone is going to take leave, right? If I'm clear. I may be because it's a stay-at-home order. The governor said at the federal level too, is whatever, we need to shut down for so many days or whatever. And I'm an essential worker, I stay home. If I am ordered to stay home, then to me, that should be paid by the federal government and the state. That to me is where we would look for funding and support from. That's mandated to stay home. I'm an essential worker. I need to stay home. That's not something, you know, I chose to do. But we also have the issue of not having a safe environment. That's on the employer. So if I stay home because you didn't have a safe environment, the employer needs to pay for that. I don't know where there's a debate there. So when we talk about this is going to be left on the employer to pick this up if the federal government doesn't do it, well, if it's under the category of unsafe, that is your responsibility. Now, if it's the category of closing down because the governor said that, that's the state's responsibility. To me, that's cut and dry. Am I missing something?
No, I think that was a question you brought up yesterday, and I understand your point. It's whatever policy, it's the policy message we're going to send, you know, because there is that thing called cost of doing business, which are kind of saying that if you have a business and you have a bus company and you have not, and there's a COVID outbreak and there's no protection for the driver, that driver should still be able to earn a living, even and not, you know, going there and risk his life. However, it's different if the government shuts the buses down because he deems it too unsafe to travel. I understand. I don't necessarily disagree that that's a policy decision that we want to make as far as, you know, so when there is an unsafe work environment and it's founded to be unsafe, because I'm sure that has to be in there.
Sure.
found to deemed to be unsafe by MOSH or by the health department, if at that time, then that they're required back pay. Now, as far as enforcement, MOSH can't do that in a short term. I'm not sure how we could do that, in writing, to just
You can't.
that point to pay. So getting back to your original question as of yesterday, where you said they shouldn't have to wait for 7 months to get paid. I understand. I'm just not sure how we could force, if it's found to be unsafe, to say, okay, now you got to give the money back. I don't believe that. I think that's a much more difficult thing to legislate on how to do it, which is why we had left it to the courts. I don't think that's an optimum way of, I understand that might not be the optimum way of doing it, but I don't know of a clearer way of compensating the employee for those missed days.
Well, see, Mr. Chairman, I think Delegate Queen raises a very important point, which is, I try to articulate where there's consensus. There's just as much disagreement, because it comes down to this. If a worker decides they don't want to show up to work because they're saying it's unsafe, what right do I as an employer have to make sure that they show up to work and they don't use that as an excuse not to work? And that, I don't see how you can do that in legislation, because that is such a personal one-on-one with an employer-employee. And that's why, we got into that thing with OSHA and MOSH and trying to put that into, statute. That is the framework that gives a worker the safety, occupational safety protections. But what it appears that the legislature wants to demand is instant gratification. When there's a problem, it gets adjudicated immediately and resolved immediately. And I just don't know how you can do that in statute.
Well, we didn't. We actually, at this point, had left it to the courts because we didn't know of any other way. It wasn't the ultimate solution, because there really is no other way that I can think of to immediately require the employee, without, like you said, a proper adjudication, to pay, the back pay, which is why we left it as it already is in MOSH.
But we also talked about, and I think Chris agreed, that many times it's, MOSH or labor or whoever the right, a complaint is made. Not every complaint that is just, it ends up in court. And so it may well be that MOSH comes in and says, or whoever it is, labor commissioner says, this is unsafe, you need to correct it. And the employee was correct. And so, by the way, you owe them back pay. And that's, the MOSH report. And many employers are going to follow that and be done, because they don't want to end up in court. And then it probably is, resolved more quickly. The court ones, probably, if it's, MOSH says you're in violation, this is what you need to do. Employer doesn't do it, then MOSH needs to file the appropriate pleadings and say whatever. And then the court's going to adjudicate it, and that's going to take some time. But I bet the majority are done.
And the perfect reason of contention is that there's an unsafe environment at work created by the very employee that is now complaining. And the employer says, yes, you're right. Yes, there was a violation, but it was his fault. Ergo, he should not get back pay. That would be a case for the courts. And that's the way we've left it, which doesn't truly satisfy Delegate Queen's point, but it keeps us out of, mandating unquestionable circumstances that they automatically be given back pay. So I disagree. We're not trying to tell them they have to automatically, pay.
Right.
We think that they were wrong. We're leaving that as it was. Chris, Delegate Howard, I know you had a surly look on your face and your hand was up. I'm sorry I missed you.
Well, I wouldn't say you were missing me, but yeah.
I definitely don't. But
well, and that's my problem is that, it's more of a granular level, but there's no mechanism for resolution of these complaints in a timely manner in the middle of a pandemic made by an employee on refusal to return to work. And at that point, to me, it just seems like we're talking about like one person at a chicken plant. That's not the way this is going to happen. There's hundreds of people, and one person's going to say, oh, there's this unsafe environment, I'm not returning to work. What's to stop everybody else from doing that? And then you're talking about supply chain disruptions. And then you're talking about 6 and 7 month resolutions.
But once MOSH comes in.
And based on court outcomes.
No, because once MOSH comes in and the health department comes in and says, no, you're incorrect, or yes, it was correct, but things have been resolved, then the employee has no argument to say, well, I disagree with MOSH. I disagree.
Okay. So walk me through that. Who comes in, MOSH or DLLR?
Whoever they complain. I would start with, it starts with DLLR. They send an investigation out. And if they need
DLLR
to-
sends the investigator out.
Yes, I believe that if that's who they complain to, they
And
can,
then what happens?
they can complain to the health department.
And
Somebody
then
go out-
then what's the health department do?
go out and investigate the claim and see if it's a.
How long does that take?
Right.
We brought.
And this
we're
is
not-
what,
we're not-
and I'm not trying to be, I'm not
but
trying.
we talked about
trying to-
this.
I'm trying
Yeah,
to.
I'm trying to, I didn't want to, I didn't want to put us down this rabbit hole again. We had that conversation yesterday.
Yeah, we've done.
What I was trying to say was, we're talking about leave right now that's related to when the governor has told people they can't come to work. Let's deal with how that's handled. And what I was trying to say, if it's something that the governor has said you have to do,
Declare.
right? Then the state needs to ante up the money if people need to stay at home. That's why I was trying to settle that this becomes federal and state,
Mhm.
not the employer.
And I don't think we're gonna be able to mandate the state to pay that.
If they told you had to stay home, how can you not?
I don't think we, as the subcommittee, are gonna be able to mandate the state. I don't believe that bill will get out of leadership. I don't believe that bill will get out of committee. I believe the price tag on that bill will be stunning. And therefore, I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole because I don't necessarily disagree, but we didn't do it last time. And depending on, like I said, who got elected, we would have had the money to do it this time. Okay?
Well, you had money this time because you got federal government money. That's
And the only reason we got federal government money is because we had a change in the Senate. And we had a president who, because our former president did not want to give money out to the states and local governments, we felt wasted their money during the pandemic.
So we think it's appropriate for the governor to tell you to stay at home and then put that onus on the employees.
No,
Employer.
on the employer, no, because that's why we said the only reason employers would have to pay is if there was available state or federal funds. No, we don't. That's why we put that caveat in there. That they
Okay.
can't pay for leave.
Okay.
So then so what's the bottleneck then? Do we not all agree with that?
I thought we did.
I think we do. I think we probably need to see it right.
We did.
What happens to the
We're there.
employee when there
Okay,
is no
then, so
state funds available?
let's move on.
Okay, because, yeah, and again, we're not gonna have the silver, this is not gonna be a silver bullet for every problem. It's a general, hopefully guidance. So I think we can all agree for now, for the purpose of Laura putting in writing, that the 14 days leave will be available if monies are made available from the federal state for such leave.
So there won't be just a requirement that employers provide it without a subsidy?
No,
I think that's where we are.
has to be subsidized. Otherwise, there's no way they can financially afford to do it. We're asking them to do something that the state itself is unwilling to do.
And then keep in mind, I mean, you're right, Delegate Queen, the direct money to states was under President Biden. But what was available, and by way of example, my law firm used, was the PPP loans. And we were able to get one, and as a result, continued to pay all of our employees. So we had them staying home, or on a rotating basis or whatever, as law firms, for whatever reason, were considered essential. So, we had, one person in each office on a rotating basis, but we paid everybody. We were very fortunate to be in that position with the PPP loan. But, that would qualify for whether I think we needed to provide, the 14 days leave, which again, our firm would have done regardless, but
Yeah, so
there's gonna, and again, this kind of catastrophic health emergency is going to have some sort of federal program and probably some state program,
and
And I
inequities.
agree with you, and that's why I'm saying, we got that, let's move on.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Not gonna be 100% in agreement, but I think we have a majority. Let's go to the.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
Laura, does anybody else have any questions? I know Delegate Queen wants us to move on, but I just want to make sure that we don't all have to disagree or agree, but we understand the direction we're taking, okay?
So-
My only comment is I'd like to see it in writing. What
I
it is.
understand.
Because
Of
that-
course,
we're gonna get-
right.
Laura?
So I guess the way that I understand what you're saying is then the state's essentially setting up a framework so that in the absence of federal programs that specify this is when you can use the leave and we're going to provide money to pay for that leave, the state has a mechanism or like a framework for saying, okay, we have the requirement in place. We know why you might be able to use the leave. Now it's up to the state to kick in the money. It sort of like leaves the framework there, but there's no actual standalone leave
mandate.
requirement.
There's no mandate, correct. There's no unfunded mandate. Yep. All right, so you good, Laura?
Yes.
Because I know Chris wants this in writing. What's the next area? Again, I guess, do we go back? Are we getting tripped up over the scope again when we talk about who can take advantage of this leave?
I was thinking that I think the leave piece, and again, we'll have to go back and look at the scope, but I think it's really just on the leave piece that we need.
Yes, everything else,
Clear that
everything else is broad.
everything else
is
can
very
remain
broad.
broader. But
Yes,
the leave piece has to be
narrow.
There is, the stay at home or the governor declares and whatever, that nobody works except.
Correct.
Right.
So can I ask a question?
Oh, go ahead.
So the
Wait,
leave piece is limited to people who have to show up for work. under-
Correct.
Correct. That's the
They have no
goal.
options.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
People that don't have options.
Who gets to decide that?
Huh?
Who gets to decide who
The
gets?
governor gets, that's when we
governor.
go back to the governor and his essential workers, and who are the people that are deemed essential that have to keep operating under a stay-at-home order.
So just so I'm clear, back to I'm a flooring business. I've got installers and I need the bookkeeper to work on site to pay the bills.
If it's a stay-at-home order, I guarantee you, you're probably not going to be considered an essential worker.
No, okay. Well, I mean,
This is just for essential workers. This is just during the stay-at-home order.
so we have two definitions. We have essential business or employer, and then we have an essential worker.
Correct?
Two separate definitions. What I'm over here on the essential worker part.
And
Who gets
what
to
I-
decide that bookkeeper is essential and has to show up to work physically?
And that's what we have to revisit that when we talk about the scope to differentiate between all employees in a dangerous health environment, which would include all of yours, including your bookkeeper, and those during a stay-away order that have no choice but to come into work.
So
So-
something that I drafted after the meeting yesterday was because it seemed like the subcommittee was saying the employer should decide which workers are essential to the operations of the business. So it would say that the essential worker means an individual who performs work essentially during an emergency that can't be done remotely. And that is determined by the employer to be critical to the operations of the employer.
Yes, and I believe that's how the FFRCA, I think, did something similar as far as requiring the employer to define who could work from home and who couldn't, and how they could work that out. So yes. All right. So what else do we need to discuss today, Laura?
Well, it sounds like you all have sort of reimagined the bill, which was specific to essential workers. And
Right.
it sounds like you all are talking about general employment, sort of occupational safety requirements, and then having this special leave requirement for this more limited class. Is that correct?
Yes, during a health, whatever health emergency, the rights of employees during a health emergency, they would apply even now. Like I said, they would apply in Chris's, after this bill passes. If there's an unsafe work environment, they deem that people aren't wearing their mask and the employer is not making them wear their masks, and they should be able to reach out, call somebody, get an investigation done, and they shouldn't have to go into work in the meantime, because that's the standards. And the standards.
Well, so just to remind, you all know this already, but what's in the reprint that we've been discussing is in statute and COMAR currently. That's the
Okay.
most standard already for all employees and employers.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I'm just like, what?
Are we recreating the wheel? Is that what you're asking?
I think it made more sense perhaps to do it when you were saying for this specific context, we want to lay it out so it's clear to everyone in statute, the right to refuse standard.
Yes.
I mean, I guess there's still benefit for doing it for all, but that sort of is the standard for everyone now. So, right? I mean, Moshe is saying this is the right to refuse standard, that they called it the discrimination standard. So
Mhm.
Yep.
theoretically,
Why I was so
workers
desperate
already
to
have
visit
that.
Seth,
time frame.
Seth,
What?
are you talking to me?
No, I'm saying that's why I was so desperate to try to map out and visit the time frame, but we were interested in just rolling past that. That's why, is because there's a lot of this framework already exists, and we're talking about a pandemic. You're talking about increased complaints and refusals to go to work due to unsafe work environments, and that's why I was trying to get some type of idea of what it looked like as far as investigatory and turnaround time. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your positive energy. I get it. I do understand. And hopefully we're not wasting everybody's time. We are talking through this problem. So I hope you guys don't feel it's a waste. You're not being heard, because we are.
No, not at all. It's
a mental health
deal.
exercise.
It's not a waste at all. It's just, this is a massive policy, and we need to be granular in a lot of its levels. And then there's some levels I feel like we're not. We're just like, flying through some stuff, and I just want to make sure that everybody's protected. That's all.
It may not be a massive policy if most of it's already covered. And this may not be anything more than, directing people during a public health safety crisis that these things are going to be followed. You're going to go to this person, bringing, do we want to empower the most to shut things down? Do we want to empower the departments? That's all.
That's a pretty big deal, CT. And then you're talking about interagency cooperation that's probably never been done before, or been done in such a scope that hasn't been stress tested under a pandemic. I mean, we're talking about, and that's where I'm going with this.
No, sir. I
But
totally
Delegate
understand.
Howard,
I'm not trying to throw shade on everything. I'm trying to make sure this thing works for everybody.
I
But
understand.
Delegate Howard, I think that's the concern. This is something that has never happened before. This is something that's an emergency. This is something that requires all hands on deck. You understand that from the military standpoint.
Sure.
You're right. We have to make sure that everyone's involved. We have to make sure things happen quickly, because this is nothing we've seen before. We're talking about this
Right.
exception of an exception.
Yeah.
So yes,
Oh, I
this
forgot about that.
requires
Thank you.
this type of action.
Right.
Okay.
I totally agree, and that's
And
what
so-
I'm saying. Is that it hasn't been done. It hasn't been stress tested. It hasn't been, and that's my frustration. Is
I understand.
because I worry about the remediation for businesses, and it's not because of the business. It's, I'm trying to protect the supply lines of people getting water delivered to them, or food. It's not all about what recourse is the business going to have. I'm trying to protect the integrity of critical infrastructure and distribution by my questioning, and that's
Well, I understand that.
frustration, but that's where
I'm not doubting your integrity on this. We're just trying to, again, I know that it's one of those things where we have to try to do something, and we can't just say, well, what worked last time will work this time, because clearly that didn't happen.
Mr. Chairman, let me take what Seth said and just add it, because what Laura was headed to is this most standard. Just remember, when a worker shows up on a job site, I'm going to use that scaffolding example again. It's either safe or it's not. A common individual would know that it's not safe, so don't go on it. How does a employee know, for example, in COVID, you have this aerosol, it's basically the flu. How do they know that it's an unsafe environment? How could they ever come to a conclusion that the air that they're breathing is safe? I don't get where they can.
It's very, at this point, we know it's very easy. If I walk into a room with a lot of people and no one's wearing a mask, I shouldn't have to go in there. That much is clear. If I'm on a bus and I'm a bus driver and there's not protective glass around me and I don't have the proper PPE and everybody's coughing on my bus, I shouldn't have to go into work.
Mr. Chairman, let me push back respectfully. The PPP, the masks were not there to keep me from getting sick because of the air I'm breathing. The PPP was designed to, if I'm sick, keeping me from exhausting the flu by sneezing or by spitting. That PPP did nothing to keep the air healthy and safe. The only way you could have done that would have been some crazy fallout mask. And no, I mean,
I'm very aware of that, or the plastic little bubbles that they built inside the buses that allowed them to drive and not have to recycle the air that the individuals were breathing. So, because the key is, Do you want to be a bus driver right now on public transportation? If nobody's wearing a mask and you're the only, and you have no protection from these people.
The masks are no protection there. I'm just telling you.
Everybody else wearing one would be. Again, you asked for an example. I'm just giving you one. That's a real example because there was a bus driver who died and everybody was coughing on his bus. He caught it. So if there's a way we can envision to protect him the next time, I'd like to do it.
Well, can we just
remember,
masks? This is science. PPP masks were
Just
not
remember,
designed
guys,
to. They were not designed to keep you from getting sick. It was to keep you from getting other people sick.
And remember, Chris,
just remember, we're not the ones who are going to define that it's unsafe. We're going to bring,
that's correct.
in the health department. So it's not what you consider safe, Delegate Adams, not what Delegate Wilson says is unsafe. Some official is going to come in who is expert in this condition and define that it's unsafe. Okay, so again, we're learning from the lessons that happened with COVID, what to do better, what not to do, and how to do it.
All right.
So
Yeah,
that's
what
the point.
and we're not going to do is continue. I can't get caught around the axle on specific. We've come a long way in this bill. We've done a lot in this bill. There is no silver bullet. It's going to answer every question. If there's another pandemic, or even if this one, kicks back up, businesses are going to suffer. Employees are going to suffer. People are going to get laid off. People are not going to get paid because the businesses are going to close, and we can't stop that. There's nothing we can do, but what we can do is try and make at least the workers safe, let the employers know what's expected of them, and make sure that, again, and that we understand at least that there are systems put in place to make sure that these individual locations, these employers are properly monitored, properly evaluated, and investigated in case of any crisis. To hopefully keep them open, to keep all this stuff open. That's what we're doing. And that's why we're trying to narrowly define the scope. We're trying to differentiate between leave and safety of all employees. So there'll always be examples of what we can't cover, what we can't guess about. I get it, but that's not what we're here for. And we've come a long way. We're almost actually, with this leave thing, we're almost done with the bill. I was trying to get Laura to go on to some of the other things we disagree with, so we can at least come back after we see all this in writing. But go, what's our next point, Laura?
Well, and on the leave discussion, you talked about what the amount of leave would be potentially, but I think I need to get clear in my mind, what do you mean? Did you agree on how
14
this would
days.
line up with federal leave? Is it
14 days.
currently? Right, but is it taken, if there's a federal sort of complement to the FFCRA that says that there's this leave, you're saying that this would be run concurrently with it? You wouldn't be stacking anything provided under federal law with what's in the state law?
I don't know why we would need to. I think this would be in the absence of any federal or state law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we just need to add a construction provision that says that this would run concurrently with any federal leave provided for purposes under the bill.
All right.
Something else we should discuss is whether the amount of leave provided would differ based on the worker's number of, if it's a full or part-time employee. The vice chair's bill and amendment sort of set out these different calculations if the worker doesn't typically work 40 hours or more. So do you all want to be specific in that regard? I think that it may make more sense if the leave allocation is bigger, like 14 days, whereas when it was just 5 days.
Yeah.
We need to.
Yeah, I thought I saw the vice chair's layout. I thought that was fine for what we're talking about, again, with the understanding.
I can pull it up on screen if you want.
Yes,
Please.
pull it up.
So is this from my amendment or is this,
This is from your amendment,
okay, so this is not what's in 581.
right?
Okay,
Well, no, this is your amendment to 581,
right.
but
it
it's
is
not in the subcommittee reprint.
Okay, that's what I wanted to, okay.
So
I-
here,
Yeah.
for part-time workers, there's a few different
You may need
calculations.
to make that bigger if you can. That's better.
Okay, this is under, wait a minute, I don't have that. Mine
This
is
is-
different. Wait,
This is
This
in a
is-
different reprint. I sent out the 3 reprints prior to the last meeting, so it is in
okay, so
the May
this-
amendment.
under the reprint of, wait a minute.
To May.
Okay, to May, okay. All right, I got it,
Okay,
because I separated 3 of them. Okay, go ahead.
So you're right, it sets out full-time essential workers would be the 14 days. Part-time essential regularly work less than 40, an amount equivalent to something else. So the question is, do we need to do the tiers? Or are you all at the place where we're talking about whatever
Clearly,
whatever
we don't want
additional
someone-
leave is available is only available, if it's paid by state or feds. So,
Right, the only thing would be if somebody works 1 day a week at a bar,
right,
happens, I don't think that they need to take 14 days, especially if
Right.
it's some kind of thing where, yeah, there has to be some kind of differentiation between part-time and full-time and the way they would be available for this. If you're working 1 day a week, no, you don't get 14 days off. Especially by that logic, 14 days would be what, 14 Saturdays?
right. And they're not, and the language isn't suggesting that they would get 14.
Right, but also asking questions like that, are those days run concurrent or they're just the days that they're scheduled to work? If I work 2 days a week, we get 6 days off, do I get to take 2 days off for the next 3 weeks?
Well,
Mr.
this
Chairman, can I-
amendment
Yeah.
actually talks about that.
Thought I read it, I must have missed that, okay.
Yeah, it just, the average number of hours that the essential worker is scheduled per week over a 6-month period ending on the date the emergency is called. And then it also says, if the essential worker did not work during the 6-month period on the date on which the emergency was declared, the reasonable expectation of the essential worker at the time of the hiring. So the amendment does try and sort of say, if you worked 1 day, you're not getting 14.
Does it say how many you will get?
It says for part-time essential workers who regularly work less than 40 hours per week, an amount of hours equivalent to the average hours worked during a typical 2-week or 4-week working period, whichever is greater. And then it does talk about essential workers whose schedules vary from week to week, and that's where A and B talk about the average number over a 6-month period, or if you've not worked 6 months, the average that is expected to work.
Okay,
Trying to cover part-time, again, these are essential workers, so we're not even really going to talk about someone who's working in a bar, because we're only talking in this section
like a grocery
about
store.
those that have been declared essential by the governor.
So like a grocery store,
Right,
part-time at a grocery store.
correct. That they would have rights to some leave. Again, this is only if it's paid by state or federal government.
Okay, and did you, in this amendment, does it talk about how the leave is be taken as far as 14 days?
It does not, but I don't object to being indicated that, we're talking about you taking the leave because you're sick or you're quarantining. So it would be consecutive.
Right, and so if they work in that theory, if they work 2 days a week, which puts, or let's say 3 days a week, which puts them at 12 days a month,
Right.
then they would be afforded 12 days leave,
Regularly work.
even though they're only gonna be working like Saturday and Sunday, let's say Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And if they wanted to take leave under, and I know there's no perfect
It's
stretch.
an amount of hours equivalent to the average hours worked during a typical 2 or 4 week period.
Right,
So if over a 2-week period, they work 6 days, they would get an amount of hours equivalent to the average hours they worked for 2-week period.
It's
So
all,
yes, it would be the 6 days.
right, so they would get that, and although they would never work that many days in a row, they would get 6 days of paid leave in a row.
That is the way it reads. So if we need to,
No, because there's no other way of doing it. That's the problem, because you don't want them to take 3 days here and 3 days there and 3 days there.
Right.
Can. It has to be taken consecutively. That's
right,
the point, is for quarantine, caring for loved ones, things of that nature. It's not to just pick and choose.
right.
Take a leave days, which is the frustration. Chris, go ahead.
I mean, I'm just imagining this being a nightmare for manufacturing. I mean, now I'm not talking about my 34 employee business. I'm talking about 500 or 600 employees working in a manufacturing facility who's, taking time off like this, whether it's paid or not. I'm trying to understand how you see this applying to shift workers and manufacturers that are trying to keep a facility operating. Any comments? Because I don't know.
As far as, you mean as far as people taking leave to quarantine, take care of loved ones who are sick with a pandemic? Because that's going to happen anyway.
Well, I mean, if a quarantine happens, it's because a doctor or a test has said they're positive, which goes to, they can produce that. And so, yeah, the employer would not want somebody in a facility if they're
right.
Yeah,
So my point is, most of these leaves are going to happen anyway. They need to take care of a family member who's got COVID. They themselves have COVID. I know we would narrow some of the definitions of how, but that's how it would, when you ask how it would appear for a manufacturer, people that are affected are going to take leave. Again, it's not perfect because this is a national health emergency. It's just, can we at least hopefully keep that place going?
It's going to be a struggle no matter what.
Yeah,
But again,
there's no
if somebody's
win,
been
there's no
exposed to COVID, you don't want them there.
Right,
Taking care of a loved one with COVID, or God forbid they have it, you don't want them there.
right.
The idea, but again, particularly by narrowing it to just the
Well-
essential workers under,
Right.
and
And
there's
remember,
an
this is
order
when
in
we first
place
stay
that
at home.
says, right,
Right. Now, the one thing that I know, one of the caveats in here was that basically the way I read it is if your children's school closed, that you should also be able to take this 14 days. I don't know if
that when we get there, that's the kind of thing we can also talk about.
okay, yeah, because that might not be,
No.
but as far as we're talking about just general health of yourself and your family, these people are in regardless. You don't want them to, they're not coming in. This is a health crisis. This is something, like I said, that if this kicks back up again in a month because people realize that they don't have to wear their masks in the summertime, then we would be dealing with that then. A safe work environment, ensuring the individuals who do get sick and stay home, if their loved ones get sick, are they allowed to care for them? That's the envision.
Just make sure the bill allows for the grocery stores to have protein in their shelves and they're able to feed people during a pandemic.
Again, I don't
And I'm
disagree.
not a
There's no
manufacturer,
disagree.
so I can't speak to the details.
I
can
know,
just
but
say
what do
that
you do if somebody's sick?
Right.
That's the conundrum.
If they're actually sick and they need to leave, the employer is going to say leave so you don't get everybody else sick. I think that's just good business practice.
Yeah.
Or if
I'm
there are
worried
3
for-
people in their home that are sick, do I want that person in there handling the food I'm going to buy?
Right.
Maybe not.
And again,
but
but Chris, this is on, I don't want to get caught on this because this is
I
on
understand.
the whole bill. I understand your objection to the whole bill for that specific reason, but I don't want to get caught up on that right now. We'll have that chance to have that discussion. What we're talking about is how do we treat part-time workers at a grocery store? That's what I want to, and it's very complex and complicated. I don't know when on this. My only caveat was whatever leave they take it all at once.
The only thing, Delegate Wilson, is do you want to incentivize that?
By what? Punishing them? Yes. No. What do you mean?
Incentivize workers to take the whole allotment at once?
I need to know. We don't have to say they have to take 14 days, but you need whatever days that they take of this leave have to be taken consecutively. I don't want them breaking it up and doing, I only work every Monday and Tuesday, so I'm gonna take Monday and Tuesday this week, Monday and Tuesday next week, and Monday and Tuesday the following week.
Okay.
So maybe it's just part-time workers need to be consecutive.
Well, full-time workers, I would think would not, for all the reasons we've laid out of why they would take it, they be consecutive too?
Well,
There's no reason they need to break it up.
the example with someone who is waiting for test results we discussed at the last meeting, that could be a scenario where someone needs a few days, they get the whatever they need.
Yeah, we also, I think Laura's right. We don't want to incentivize the 14 days. I don't necessarily disagree on the part-time piece. You're right. I don't want them now getting 3 weeks off because they work 1 day a week.
Yeah, and I guess I just worry that with these individuals, if you don't narrow it, that they're going to take. Well, I'm gonna take a COVID day today because I need to go get a test and wait for the results. I'm gonna get another test next week and wait for the results. I'm gonna get another test in 2 weeks and wait for the results. You can't stop me from getting a test. I went out drinking last night. I'm going to get a test. I'll wait for the results, which they can do, and that's what we do.
Right. Let me think this through and maybe talk to the advocates who are, and see if they've got some ideas on
Because
how
there's
to.
got to be a limit to how much time
Right.
they can basically disturb the process at work.
Right. Okay. All right. Let me talk to the advocates and see if I can get language that kind of
Okay.
addresses
All right,
this
Laura.
concern.
And Mr.
Right.
Chair and Madam Vice Chair, if I could add my question, just a little technical question. Why do we have to specify 2 week or 4 week period?
Yeah, I was going to get back to that. What's the difference between a 2 week? Why do we use both a 2 week and a 4 week in order to find?
Because there
Yeah.
might be cases where it's a question of somebody works 2 days, 1 week. The only thing I can liken it to, and this is not what the advocates told me, but is the way I count overnights for child support purposes. The schedule may be varied enough that maybe the first 2 weeks, it's only 2 days a week. Then the second 2 weeks, it's 3 days a week. So it's sort of like how best to calculate, if it's consistent that you can do 2 weeks. I work 2 days 1 week and I work 2 days the next week. And it's always that way. Then you can do it on a 2.
Why not a 4 week period then? Why not just say 4 weeks?
I don't care. I don't
Yeah.
know.
2 weeks,
Or
it
something
would
like that,
capture
yeah.
that same thing as 4 weeks.
All right, that's fine. Take out,
Just for simplification.
that's
Yeah.
fine. Fine with me. Take out the 2 weeks and just say a
For a
4.
4 week period. I think we lost the chairman.
He's
Yep,
been on
lost
for
him a while
about 8
ago.
minutes.
All right, so what's the
All
next?
right, I'll talk to the advocates about how we wrap something about when the leave can be taken in such a way,
Okay.
not taking advantage of the circumstances.
Right.
Okay, I'll come back with something.
All right, Laura, there's an
Next.
issue about, have we discussed a part when it comes to the leave about proof?
No,
You all did discuss it, but you haven't, I don't think there's been any agreement about,
Right. And I guess I don't understand personally why you can't provide some kind of proof when it comes to a pandemic. This isn't like a sexually transmitted disease or something. This is an actual, where we kind of need to keep track of not only who has it, but who is in contact with people that have it. And for most of the reasons we've laid out to take leave, having to do with being in contact with somebody who's sick or being sick, or I just don't know why we wouldn't want to allow the employers to require some kind of proof.
so what you see on screen is, I thought, sort of representative more of what the subcommittee was thinking about, or at least Delegate Wilson. This was actually just with Delegate Wilson initially, allowing an employer to require documentation. And if the worker fails or refuses to provide the documentation, then the employer would be able to deny a subsequent request during that same period, same public health emergency. The vice chair's amendment, which I could also pull on screen if you'd like, says just the opposite, that an essential employer may not require documentation before the payment of public health emergency paid leave. So I think it's it's a policy decision
I
whether,
don't really see why in this public health crisis, we wouldn't want to know as much about what's going on out there as possible, especially because we're requiring the employer report to the health department whenever somebody's sick in his office.
The bill requires an employer to report positive test cases.
Right. See, so I'm
Positive test
saying,
results.
so how does that work? He's got to require, but he's required to report, but you're not required to tell him. I don't know why in a serious situation like this, we wouldn't require documentation.
Do we know what's in place right now? I mean, somebody yesterday raised it and I have some similar
She said
about
to
HIPAA. I don't
tuberculosis.
disagree, Delegate Wilson, that I don't know why the employer wouldn't know or be.
Right.
I raised it with tuberculosis. When I used to
Tuberculosis.
be a manager, that was
Oh,
one of the
thank you.
things you
Right.
had to, people had to report to you and I had to report to other folks.
Okay,
Right.
all right.
So it's not everything is sacrosanct when it comes to health, and HIPAA.
Yeah, I don't have any problem in needing to tell the employer when
Okay.
I'm requesting the leave that either I have it or somebody else has it.
Right now, okay, what I want to, the question is that proper documentation? Because that's affirmation that I have it or somebody else has it. And what employers usually ask for when it comes to, like when we talk medical leave, after more than a few days, you have to bring in a doctor's note of proof.
The vice chair's amendment does have another provision, which I didn't mention just now, that says that during an emergency, an essential worker shall provide notice to the essential employer of the need for leave as soon as practicable, if required by public health officials to isolate for the protection of the workforce and the public health. An essential worker shall inform the employer of the qualifying reason for the leave is needed, if informing the employer does not violate applicable health privacy laws. And then it says an employer may not require documentation. So her amendments require notice to the employer, but not documentation.
And again, only for confirmatory purposes, wouldn't you want to know specifically? If I go and say, hey, I've got COVID, I need 14 days off, because that's what it's basically saying. That's not really confirmation, that's him saying. And there are protocols that have to be followed when somebody at your employment has, this kind of disease, communicable disease. So I don't know why we wouldn't be able to require proof that, yes, I have it, here you go. Because this is tracing, background tracing, and we need scientific data, as much data as possible. They saying, "Oh, I've got COVID, give me 15 days." I don't think that's in a health emergency. I don't think that's appropriate.
Right.
So yeah, I would ask.
How hard is it to provide proof?
You get a test result. You can take
Okay.
take a picture of your test results and text them to your boss.
I guess the scenario could arise where someone is notified, they get a contact tracing call that they may have been exposed, and then in that case, they're supposed to isolate, I guess, for a certain period of time and then get tested. That could be a scenario where I guess you'd have to find a way of documenting for the employer that you got a contact tracing call. So I'm not exactly sure in that case how that would
That's
work.
a good point. Unfortunately, we're so far ahead of that now that if you got one, you would just go get a test that day. So
Yeah.
it's applicable so much to this one because no, you don't need to take a day off, 14 days, you go get a test. But if we're talking forward looking, yeah, I'm not sure how to do that. I just think some documentation they should be able to ask for documentation. If they get a contact tracing call, they're like, okay, well, here's the number. They called me. You can call them if you want, but I got to go get tested and wait for my results.
I don't have a problem with needing to provide the documentation
Yeah.
of the
I think
need
we
to
should
use
just-
the leave. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't think we have to get caught up on
Your
that.
number two, I philosophically don't have a problem with it, but sort of trying to play it out. Okay, I refused to give it to you the first time. And now it's the second time. If an essential worker fails or refuses to provide documentation as required by an essential employer under paragraph 1, the essential employer may deny a subsequent request to take the public health emergency leave during the same emergency.
I think that's pretty much pointless because number one, if we require documentation the first time, 2, you ain't got but so much leave. So there's not like a repeat of this, time and time again. I think if we require documentation, number 2 becomes superfluous.
I think so too.
Well, then
And
I
then
guess you could say would deny the leave period,
Right.
meaning it's not paid. It's just unpaid time
Well,
off.
Just say without documentation, the leave can be denied.
So if they
The possible
fail or refuse
paid
to
leave,
provide,
yeah.
if they fail or refuse to provide documentation, the employer may deny the request for leave. Is what
Correct.
you're saying. I
Correct.
think the advocates would not like that.
No,
There's
and
no
it's,
way around
again, in a public health emergency, I'm still a little worried about that too. If the employer denies, just denying that they're going to pay for it, I
That's
guess.
correct. But
You know-
the problem is, I just don't know in a public health emergency. I know the advocates aren't going to like it, but we have a responsibility to the public in this case. Tell me something. It can't just be in your word, oh, I've got COVID.
So they, instead of saying they may
That's fine.
deny the request for leave, just say they may not
May
required
not
to
be
pay.
obligated to pay for the leave,
yeah.
Yeah.
or the employee may not be eligible to be paid for.
And great point, because now we're just talking about paid leave versus unpaid leave. That's correct. We can't stop them from taking the leave, but they don't have to pay for it. It's still a disruption to the business, but this is a health emergency, so I get it.
So here's what I'm thinking, even without documentation. So let's say I suspect I might have got COVID
Mhm.
and had got tested and I don't know the result the same day or for whatever reason, right? But I didn't want to infect other people or jeopardize whatever. I decided voluntarily to take time off, and I hope my employer would be sympathetic and allow me to take that emergency health leave. But if not, I probably have I probably can resort to my own other paid leaves, regular paid leaves for the time
Sure.
being until I can come back and approve it was COVID related, right?
Correct.
I think that's correct, yes.
Okay.
In addition, we're still going on the caveat that this leave would be made available if the state has, the ability to compensate. So employers aren't going to be as desperate, to stop people from taking this leave as long as they can protect their business and continue to be productive. So I don't think we're going to be running into a lot of these, big running these.
Right. Okay.
And did we discuss, Laura, we talked about this childcare in, because we skipped over that with what we just discussed.
That's in my amendment, right?
That's correct. It was
Which, that's also one,
There's a lot of things that is in there that we should,
yeah.
right?
yeah.
These are the 9 reasons that an
Mhm.
essential worker could take the leave.
Right.
So I think last meeting you all discussed in the first one saying is experiencing symptoms associated with a communicable disease and is awaiting test results.
Correct.
Yeah, right. Seeker obtain medical diagnosis, care, or treatment.
What is a symptom of a communicable disease? You don't have to answer that, just a question.
I mean, we could add to that symptoms identified by the CDC or, the disease that the health emergency is about.
My stomach hurts.
That's not one of the COVID symptoms, actually. And
Okay.
so I'm assuming by way of example, my stomach,
Also smell.
but by way of example, what the CDC was talking about was, did you have a headache, sore throat, runny nose, all of the things that we check on our little boxes to get into the building every day.
Well, can I ask how that?
CDC or health department that determined it. So if we needed to sort of indicate, any of the symptoms of the communicable disease as defined by, so it's not a question of, I have a stomach ache today. I think it might be a communicable disease. We're trying to limit this to whatever the health emergency is that's in place.
But is there a rationale for number 2 at all? Because if number 1 requires any symptoms that you go be tested, number 2 is basically saying, I'm feeling these symptoms. Yeah, but you've already been tested. So just because you've lost your sense of smell, test came back negative, why would we need number 2? Because it's covered number 1.
Are you on Roman numeral 2?
I am on the actual real number 2. When we talk about
Right.
number 1, it talks about isolation, diagnosis, Roman number 2, experiencing symptoms associated with disease. Number 2 talks about seeking to obtain medical
I
diagnosis.
see.
for that. So it's like very
Yeah,
repetitive.
right. It's
Because if the goal of number 2 is that I got it and I'm being treated, well, that makes sense. You know, but it has nothing, I don't know if just symptoms enough because you lost a sense of smell, but I've got a test and
mhm.
leave.
Yeah, if you're seeking medical diagnosis, care, or treatment because of the symptoms, yeah, it's duplicative.
Yeah.
Preventive care concerning,
And again, that goes in preventive care can be very loose when it comes to that. Like, what does that mean?
mhm. Okay.
I have a sense of smell.
All right. Or it might be that, 1 and 2 can be combined. I can
Correct.
work on that to make sure it's covered.
So Madam Vice Chair, the
Yeah.
question on the screening is, do you feel ill today?
Yeah, but you have to check all of them.
Well, I'm assuming if I fail on one, I fail on all of them, but if I said I feel ill today, they probably won't let me in.
Well, that's also why we have the whole thing about and are awaiting a test or have gotten tested, meaning you don't just get to sit there with your, because you have a loss of sense of smell. Yeah, I'm not coming in. You need to actually do something affirmative as well for the,
I think if you
So I just
check
answered
number
the-
1
Wait a minute,
and you
so I
got
just
the
answered-
negative,
So I
then
just
you're
answered
going to
the
have to go
question.
talk to somebody to explain what it
This
is that you said. You feel
So
ill,
this-
you have a stomach ache. That's not COVID.
I just answered the question on that survey and I said, are you ill today? And the answer is yes. I answered no on the other questions. And if I gave that to the security guy, he'd say, go home.
and that no.
You'd either
and
say
we'll
go home or he's going to say you're going to have to go talk
go
to
get
somebody.
tested.
What do you
Now,
think he's going to do with that little negative sign? He's not going to let me in the building.
Right, that means you go get tested. If you don't go get tested, you just go home. You don't get to say, look, I need you to pay me for leave. That's why number 1 says and are awaiting test. We're going to combine those two to make sure that these symptoms and all that you may be feeling, we don't want you in there, that you're honest, we don't want you in there, but you have to go get tested immediately. And that's good public policy.
I just gave you the example that allows an employee to take off for whatever reason, just because they feel ill. Back to my stomach hurt question.
No, because you've got to get tested. That's why we're combining 1 and 2.
All right, well, I go
I'll
get
work on
tested.
that.
All right, so I say I get tested
Uh-huh.
and then I come back the next day, oh, I'm fine. Just
That's
to get
unfortunate.
abused.
That's the nature of communicable diseases though, but we don't want you in there because you might actually be sick. Don't you want, like if somebody says I don't have I want them to go home and get tested. If they get negative tomorrow, I don't think that's abuse. I'd rather them go get tested than come in and find out a few days later or when they decide to go get tested that they and now 10 of my people have this communicable disease. Again, it's not a silver bullet, Chris. I understand you're not gonna like it all the time, but I'm trying to get these. Still, Seth, go ahead. You're
on mute.
angry with the mute on, buddy. Still look angry with mute button on. We'll wait.
You see my mug? Okay, yeah.
I can't hear you, big guy.
I just tried to unmute him, but I can't.
No, don't do
That's what
that.
it says. Are you on mute? Okay.
Seth, can you hear me? That was the best speech you've ever given.
So, I think some of my questions were answered, but earlier, because we just kept talking, I think one of the questions I have is that, I've spent a little time at a defense company recently, and, there was a girl there at the time that was pregnant, and she revealed to me, oh, I'm pregnant, and this is like a year ago. Oh, congratulations and everything, and it was wonderful. I thought it was fantastic. She was a good worker. But I certainly couldn't reveal that to other workers because, that's an HR issue. So, when we're talking about.
This is not the same thing because you'll have to let people know. If somebody says I'm positive,
Can't talk.
let the rest of people, you said you can't talk? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
Yeah, pretty much. No, that's okay. Go ahead.
There's a break, so I didn't hear you. All right. Okay, can we go to, what's the next one, number 3?
Right.
Laura, could you tell me which page you're on right now on these bullet points?
I think it's 19.
Okay.
Well, so it's in a reprint, so it's not, all the pages don't have numbers, but it's,
In the reprint that was done with my amendment, it's page 17 of 20.
Your amendment.
well,
Yes.
that's
Yes.
also in the what I have
Oh,
on screen.
This is on the screen too? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so it's, if you go to, it's page 16 in the bill, and you scroll, that it's all inserted text, so it doesn't have a page number, but it's,
All right, I see.
All right, thank you.
All right.
So we're gonna combine 1 and 2.
Right,
We're on number 3, which is care for family member who is isolated without an order to do so because of diagnosed or symptoms of communicable disease. Again, I would ask to scratch out symptoms, put diagnosed.
okay.
Is it infectious disease that we need to be concerned about?
It's communicable, things that it's, because almost every disease I would consider to be infectious. Communicable is when people can easily pass it between each other.
But, okay, well,
maybe, does it
I'll
need to
see.
say communicable disease subject to the public health order?
Yes, without a doubt,
Maybe,
yes.
'cause I think that-
Specific to the health emergency.
yeah, I think that's needed. So, because there are
Mhm.
diseases that we aren't concerned about.
Yeah, because, yeah, it's not a cold,
Right,
right?
Okay.
I think 4 might be okay. Again, with
Yeah,
caveat that it's subject to the disease, subject to the health emergency.
right,
But they've been told by someone to stay home, but
correct. By a
4 is
public-
okay.
Public health worker or healthcare professional,
Mhm.
that their presence makes it dangerous.
All right,
This
5,
is where 5 gets real loose.
yeah, care for,
That's basically the same thing as number 4, only it's somebody else that you're related to.
but at least it is an official saying so.
Yeah, but it's just saying that he can't go in there. And so now that means your wife can't go to work.
Say that again?
The way I read this is that basically, no, never mind. It's caring for that person.
All right, so you think 5's okay with
Yeah, it would have to
subject,
be
it's the disease subject to the order?
correct.
All right, 6, due to essential workers' inability to work.
This I didn't understand
I'm not sure I do either.
because that's every essential worker.
Essential workers' inability to work or telework. I think this is saying you're staying at home,
Right,
but you
but
can't
they're-
work.
right. Which
So I
is-
think the example that makes sense to me is for DLS, when we were told that the complex was shut down, we weren't allowed to go in.
Mhm.
We had certain administrative staff who they don't have laptops. Maybe they do now, but they didn't initially. And so they were
Oh, I
on,
see.
they were given basically admin leave because they couldn't perform
Mhm.
their job at home.
Are they still essential workers though? Because remember, we're defining this as the essential workers, number one, that during a pandemic, they're told they still have to come in.
Mhm.
I don't think that would be
So
applicable.
6 may
because-
not apply to what
Right.
we're limiting it
to
to.
our goal, right? Because we're limited to, during a stay at home, they have to come in.
Right,
So we can strike number 6.
come out.
Number 7, I don't see how that can stay in either.
Yeah, if we're really trying to limit it to, you have to go to work and
Yeah,
work. Right,
these people are no longer in danger if the business,
if they're staying home, they're not getting paid, but that's kind
Right.
of different.
yeah, cool, the business shut down, right?
I know. No, I understand.
Family member. And this one, number 8, has to do with schools closing, basically. And saying that they can take this an additional 14 days leave because the schools are closed. So, and they're required to come in. I think this goes really outside of our goal of, we were trying to protect them, give them a healthy work environment. And if they have to come in, we want to make sure that they can, I don't know. I just think,
All right, I think that if it's to care for a child or other family member, when the care provider of the family member is unavailable. So Roman numeral 1. So, my partner is taking care of the children and gets COVID, can't take care of the children. Then, but I'm an essential worker. I understand the school part is tough, but if the person that's caring for my children can't take care of them.
Well, remember, that's also any daycare. The daycare shut down. If all the schools shut down, those are your childcare providers.
Mm-hmm.
Health emergencies, they've all been shut down. Then they're allowed this extra 14 days of government subsidized paid leave, which again should lessen the sting.
Mm-hmm.
I get it.
All right.
This is, again, we got to remember, this is only going to be able to take effect if the state or federal government says, yes, we have the money, we will reimburse you. It will be a distraction from your business, but you will not at least take a financial hit. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Yes.
A child. What's the definition of a child?
We defined that. I thought we decide it should be defined in here.
It is. It's a few pages before.
Yeah. So it should be under the age of 18.
Yeah.
So a 17-year-old high school senior, school's closed, and I can take 14 days off paid.
And I remember this is going to be compensated.
You're right. The child it's just defined as a child of, but it's not, doesn't have an age.
And again, what age would you suggest, Chris?
Well, I would suggest we move unfavorable on the bill, but that's.
And that's what I'm saying. I need your help on this because I know you can nitpick on me, but truthfully, if I have a 7-year-old badass kid that I don't trust, maybe I want to be home. If I have a 13-year-old kid that is very responsible, maybe I don't have to be. If I have a 9-year-old kid, who's to determine the age of viability when it comes to a kid taking care of themselves, depending on how untrustworthy your child is?
My 17-year-old has COVID and is on an intubated in the hospital.
Right, but this is more. But that's different. That should be covered in another one. This one is more for when their child care, the care facility. I'm sorry, the care provider is no longer available. Mm-hmm. That's the care providers, not the illness of the family member.
Mr. Chairman, I can't answer your question.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I understand you throwing a wrench in the cog.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The Bible. Thank you. So I'm fine with that.
But not to just ignore Delegate Adams' question. Don't we have some rules on how old you have to be before you can care for somebody? Like you can't babysit unless you're this age. So
is it latchkey 12?
Yeah, so maybe somebody under that age or so would be someone you have to have care for.
And the problem is my oldest daughter, I wouldn't have trusted her at 16 to stay home.
I understand, but in general, we do have some rules on what we consider too young to be cared for by a teenager or something.
I got it.
Yeah, and I think that there must be Maryland law that
it is law.
What age a child is considered old enough to be left alone.
Well,
right. That's what I'm getting.
Be held
to.
accountable if they let the child go home after school for a few hours alone.
It's a latchkey kids. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
But so are you saying that you guys want to?
I would argue against putting an age in. Only
Me too.
Again, this is a limited time and a limited circumstance, and I think it's really hard to predict. Technically, an 8-year-old can be left alone for several hours. Does that mean I want my 8-year-old home with?
No, you don't want your 8-year-old there, but your 17 or 18-year-old should be able to be at home, I would think. So I don't know.
I don't
know. I
think it just depends.
I'm supportive of the bill, but I can understand that argument.
I understand it totally.
I don't want to hear Adams and the crew all complaining about we get stuck on that.
Right.
That's all right. I think
get it.
CT and I can argue about why, again, on a limited basis. This is because somebody in the house is sick.
And guys, and I hope you do understand, we have, and I know you don't, I don't expect y'all to vote for the bill. We have, the unions will never talk to me again after this. I've done everything I could to make this as viable as I can for our businesses. So, I mean, I'm just, so we're listening to what you're saying. I hope you don't think you're being dismissed. I just want to make sure we can also push on and we don't keep getting caught wrapped around the axle and stopping and kind of losing our way. So I guess we've left number 8 alone. Now we're down to number 9.
So. Yeah, 9 might be difficult. Let's see. Due to the essential worker's inability to work because the essential worker has a health condition that may increase susceptibility to or risk of a communicable disease. And then it's age, heart disease, asthma, lung disease, diabetes, kidney disease, or a weakened immune system.
I'm
Again, these are only essential workers.
I'm
Under
48
the order have to work.
I'm 48 years old and I have high blood pressure.
And your weight?
And I'm about 30 pounds overweight.
I didn't mean
Well,
you.
none of those things are listed.
The age and heart disease, yes. And my family has a history of heart disease.
No, and again, I don't understand the logic of this one because it's only these symptoms don't go away once that 14 days is up. So I really don't understand why this would be in there because this will be consistent after that leave is up. And taking leave, it doesn't get them back. I don't really see. I understand the point of why they wouldn't go to work. I just don't see why it would be part of a leave program when they would have to return to work when they're done.
Right. And this may just have to be their personal choice.
That's correct.
Again, the question being, do they get paid leave?
Right.
For up to 14 days because they have heart disease?
Right. And then again, like I said, they got to come back afterwards. Even if they take the pay, they're still not avoiding their risks. So I don't know if that needs to be in this. I would strike it.
Okay. I mean, I don't love it, but I understand, and to move it forward and get some consensus, I hear you.
All right,
And
Laura,
hopefully, again, I think individual employers will also try and work this through. And if they know someone needs to be home, I hope they work with the employee to do that. But all right, and this section may not be construed to require an essential employer to compensate an essential worker for unused public health emergency leave when the essential worker leaves employment. That's a good thing.
yeah.
Preempt, limit, or otherwise affect any other law that provides for public health emergency leave benefits that are more generous than required under the subtitle. I think that covers us from the federal piece.
Well, that's the stackable thing. That's
yeah.
saying we can stack it.
That's saying the employee can actually ask for something else if it's available.
Right, which I thought we were not trying to do. I thought we were trying to make any federal.
All right, so you want to take out 2.
Preempt. Yeah. So the federal, whatever federal program.
Because of the way we're drafting the bill. I got it. Okay. Preempt, limit, or otherwise affect any workers' compensation benefits that are available under Title IX.
That's just the law, I think.
I think that's just the law, so I would leave it in.
Yeah, right.
Prohibit an essential employer from adopting and enforcing a policy that prohibits the improper use of public health emergency leave, including prohibiting a pattern of abuse of the leave. Or prohibit an essential employer from.
Oh yeah, this doesn't stop them from giving guidance.
These construction provisions are modeled after what's in the sick leave law. So there's something in the sick leave law that says a court couldn't interpret this to mean an employer can't have a policy that tries to curb abuse of the leave.
I see.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I got
Okay.
it. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
All right. Prohibit an essential employer from providing additional public health emergency paid leave or any other type of leave. Okay, again, what we've talked about, if employers going to do more, good for them. An essential employer may require an essential worker who uses public health emergency leave to provide documentation of the need to use the leave.
Yeah, we already went over
Yeah.
that.
We went all that. Okay.
Right. Yeah, we did talk about the denial. Yeah, we did this. Commission.
Oh, I see. That was from before. I got you. Okay.
Yeah, I jumped up.
See, that wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
Madam Vice Chair, can we go back to 4 for a minute?
Yeah.
Me as an employer, if I know that somebody's abusing this policy, I have no ability to, well, for example, terminate their employment.
Or put in place-
And Adams, this is a construction provision. So up in D, it says this section may not be basically interpreted to prohibit an employer from having that type of policy.
Right.
So I could.
So
Yes.
it's protecting an employer's ability to have a policy that,
And stop the abuse.
you all discussed this earlier, but I think it's an important point and I want to make sure I'm clear on your intent. So when we discussed the retroactivity versus having prospective application, it sounds like you don't want an employee to, or a worker to be able to retroactively have leave paid that they may have taken, but you weren't necessarily saying you didn't want it provided in the current pandemic. So what is your intent for the application if this were to pass and become effective immediately? Would an employer need to provide it in the current state of emergency or not?
If there are federal funds or
There are
state.
federal funds available for this that will compensate the employer, yes.
Okay.
And I would disagree with that.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Well, if there's federal funds available or state funds available, that sounds great. But what if there's, and I'm being ridiculous, but what if there's $1 available? Well, then state funds or federal funds have come available. That doesn't mean the businesses are going to be covered.
Well, how about this, Seth? If we say federal funds available to compensate, that means they would have to be, I would imagine.
I would put that the state must compensate.
We'll get murdered.
In other words, I don't want to run out of money and then us go, hey, sorry about that. But federal funds available, so you have to have this policy in effect, or we have so we have to have this policy.
I think we can make it clear that the funds have to be available upon your request for them.
That they
It's
must,
not like
that
they ran
must.
out.
No, we can't make, we can make that, we can say that the funds must be available prior, before the employee has to give this leave. We can't make the state do this. The leadership would kill me and probably the vice chair for that.
I just want to ensure that the funding mechanism and the reimbursement
I
mechanism.
understand. We've got to work on the language,
Yeah.
but I hear what you're saying. Yes.
Yep, I understand. All right, so we also got, we talked about the misclassification. Is that still going to apply here? Because originally we were not talking about contractors, we were talking about employees, right? Correct?
Yeah, can I read this before. The only concern I have is this: how do you unintentionally classify a worker?
Without a doubt, very nerve-wracking to say that, because if you think they're a contractor because they use their own hours and what they wear, and come to find out somebody says, well, no, they're not a contractor, they're considered an employee, then, well, it also says in order to avoid paying the essential worker thing. And remember, this is something that we have now, that essential worker leave is also now only if it's funded by the state or feds. So I don't know why they would try to avoid paying it if they're going to get the money back. It makes it a lot less onerous when we have that requirement of having the money's available first.
So Chris, Delegate Adams, are you just saying that the or unintentionally should be deleted?
Oh, well, I mean, okay, so I have, and Lord knows I've got some experience on this matter. I'm not imagining a scenario where somebody unintentionally misclassifies and then is going to be, I mean, in the law, there's something called a knowing violation and then not knowing violation.
Right.
Violations, but this unintentionally doesn't seem like it has any legal, I don't know what it means. It doesn't speak to me.
Well, without a doubt, if you don't specify and you just say an employee may not classify, it'll be whether it's intentional or unintentional. And the reason I was put in there, because that would be, if you just say the employer may not misclassify, that's like saying whether it's intentional or unintentional. Those are actually.
Laura,
Yeah.
could you get rid of intentionally or unintentionally and replace it with knowingly
Mhm.
classify?
Yeah, right. And that's what I was gonna say. We could just make sure that that's something that they've done, even though it does say with the intention, but it does say
Yeah,
in order to avoid paying essential
right.
workers.
I
So
don't
it actually
think you
puts
need, I'm sorry.
knowingly. It doesn't, you don't need the knowingly in there because it says in order to avoid paying, it means do it with the intent of avoiding paying the essential worker.
Well, that's what knowingly means, because knowingly is in another part of the law that relates to misclassification.
I mean, I don't think it hurts it, fine. I mean, that's fine. I don't think it changes the definition. It does say-
So here's a scenario where it might be unintentional, just for the sake of whatever. And I think what I would argue is that not use knowingly, but take out intentionally or unintentionally. Let's say that you classify someone as a independent contractor. And eventually, and the IRS decides you weren't allowed to do that. You didn't intentionally do it, but the IRS has decided you didn't meet whatever the standard is for determining someone as an independent contractor. So I think you take out intentionally or unintentionally and then leave it as it is. Because then I do think they're still going to have to find an intention that you did this to avoid paying something.
And further along in this, one of the things that I've always concerned with, I'll continue to bring up, is whenever they put reasonable attorney's fees, a lot of attorneys make their living off the threat that it was only $1,000 or maybe 3 hours that you misclassified an individual. But by the time we get done with depositions and all that, it's going to be about $50,000. And then, so basically we'll settle this now for $70,000. I don't know if there's another way to do this, but I have a big problem with these attorney's fees that we're throwing in. We're creating boutique law firms that just do this. And I've watched them prey on a lot of businesses by on small, sometimes unintentional mistakes. And, but you know what? Nobody wants to go to trial. Nobody wants to pay the attorney $30,000 when they can settle for 20. And I'm always concerned whenever we see the attorney's fees of creating these boutique law firms. And I've seen them out there, and they are both true.
So let me just say that what I think you're saying is accurate. And what I also think is that the knowingly part actually is a higher standard than just misclassifying. What you're trying to avoid are employers who have employees, the pandemic comes around, and then all of a sudden they shift all their workers to contractors. That would be a knowing, in my opinion, that's a knowing violation. And knowing violation under like the Workplace Fraud Act has a different penalty provision than a not knowing or by mistake. And so if it's a not,
Okay, I'm not going to argue against it. Put knowingly in.
I think
Yeah.
knowingly, yes.
All right. So we're back on my issue about and I guess this is something for the attorney or somebody, the reasonable attorney's fees. I'm just worried about, jacking up the number of lawsuits, basically threats of lawsuits against business owners during, these situations. I don't know if there's a way around it because I know this is typically what we do. And I'm trying to undo some of the stuff I think we've done in the past because it's causing a lot of business owners heartache, especially for purposes of classification. I've seen it going on right now. You're talking about maybe, $1,500 throughout a year, and they're suing for $150,000 because they're threatening a lot of legal fees and depositions and stuff like that. And, your payment of attorney's fees. I don't know if that's the will of the people. I don't know what the benefit of having the attorney's fees in. I'm just not sure, Madam Vice Chair, on this.
So I don't disagree with you about the boutique law firms. However, the penalties, et cetera, that are imposed here, the reason I think we have to leave reasonable attorney's fees in is because there isn't any other way to pay for them. In other words, what the relief that can be granted is, a penalty of not more than $1,000.
Yeah.
Any relief to make the individual whole, rescission of any discipline, reinstatement of the essential workers if they were terminated, and back pay. But how does an attorney get paid? In other words, if I'm billing this individual by the hour.
No question. Do you always?
So I agree with you that it's abused, but I don't know how, I mean, these
Well, in-
employees need,
Well, here's the problem. In a case like this, we're talking about the commissioner determines. So this isn't in a court of law yet, correct?
that's true.
So that's my issue. Why do you need attorney's fees? And I know, I get it. You know, you want somebody who to zealously represent you, but we're not in a court. And I'm always worried about, that's all. I'm just, we don't have
All right,
to.
well,
Guys.
you know, then it puts an amount in if you have to, but again, it's sort of, you're still having an attorney, probably bill by the hour, because this isn't a
Without a doubt.
care of whatever. It's before it's like a workers' compensation case. Now,
Yeah.
as you know, is, done, you get a percentage of what a permanent partial disability award is, or a temporary disability. But, I think you have to put something in, and I think the commissioner is going to have to make a determination. You've got $150,000 in attorney's fees, but all I'm giving the individual is, $30,000 in back, whatever, then there's a problem.
Yeah. All right. This might not be the time to fight that then. That's just,
I don't think it is. I don't disagree with you, but I don't think this is.
I got you. All right. Are we almost done, Laura?
I think so.
Well, then there's uncodified language. Yay.
Oh, shit.
I did want to point out with regard to the penalties that Ms. Waterman reached out to me and sort of provided some additional information. The new set of Valderrama amendments that I sent out previously changed the penalty provision. Ms. Waterman pointed out that the $1,000 penalty is less than what's provided for generally under MOSH law. So I just want to sort of note that she sent me an email with some information and then attached like the MOSH guide that they use. And she said that the MOSH currently sets the minimum penalty for serious violations at $5,000. The maximum is $70,000. I haven't been able to verify that myself, but I just want to kind of note that I guess at least one of that.
I would like to adopt the MOSH standard if we could.
Okay, I can look into that more and see what is in statute. And then I can bring that back.
Okay.
Please.
Let's see. This is the section 2 of this reprint is the uncodified language, essentially requiring MOSH to adopt a emergency temporary standard related to COVID if OSHA sets one out. And if OSHA does not, it requires MOSH to develop one. This would be a temporary, what?
Does this at all negate them from any obligations for, again, forward-looking on developing or adopting an OSHA standard for the next public health crisis? By putting this uncodified, does this?
This would be a COVID specific standard. There had been, I think, talk with House Bill 124, Delegate Valderrama's bill, about a more permanent standard. And you can see here on the screen in B2, the secretary is required, the expiration of this temporary standard would be at the end of the health emergency or the adoption of a permanent standard by OSHA. So it's sort of making way for a more permanent standard if one is adopted. It doesn't say anything, though, about the state adopting a permanent standard.
And the only question would be not for a permanent standard, but for, again, this was for consider, I forgot what you call this. What's the big, catastrophic public health emergency? That's what we've defined this as. So we're not just to this pandemic, we're looking forward. So with this uncodified language, I still want them to do the same thing for other, health crises beyond COVID. Does this uncodified language preclude them from doing that?
Doesn't preclude them, but it also doesn't require them.
Right, and I'd like to require them to continue when it comes to these catastrophic public health emergencies to adopt OSHA and OSHA safety standards temporarily, at least. I don't know about as far as a permanent, but at least.
We would have to codify that if it's going to be a permanent requirement that they adopt regulations or adopt a specific standard for the given public health emergency.
Is that the
I
way?
think that's fine. I think we ought to require that.
That's the goal is forward looking.
Okay. I can look back at some of the language in House Bill
Yeah,
124.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
do we need to look at that? I have to find it. But
Who was that? I have to look at it, but wasn't hers more to do with just any airborne aerosol disease? Was that what she was talking about?
Yes.
And I think my problem with that was we're talking about flu and everything else. It really didn't limit it to.
Oh, that's what 124 was?
Yeah, it was about the airborne or aerosol.
Oh, here's Valderrama's. Wait a minute, let me see.
And also, I know everybody needs to get lunch before
Yeah,
I was getting ready to end this. Do you guys want to meet?
okay.
What's that?
We want to try and meet tomorrow.
No.
I'm fine.
We can, let's, Delegate Wilson, I think we need to circle back with the chair. So let him know where things are and then we can reach back out to the subcommittee.
Okay, be ready to meet tomorrow. I don't know what's going on with the floor. It sounds like it's very short, which is a sucky reason to come here, but
I know, I thought they were gonna give us a day off.
I thought they were too, but we have to put our suits for about 8 minutes. And then we'll try to figure out what to do from that point.
Okay.
I know
Yeah,
that
you're
I
right, I'm
have,
looking at
Fine.
124. I don't think it goes in.
but if we do it, we'll be in the morning, okay, guys?
That's fine.
So for now, Laura, I know we've given you a lot to do. I really appreciate your help on this, guys.
Will you please send the notice out in time?
Yes.
Okay, I can be on these calls. Okay,
I'm trying, man.
hey, let me tell you, I'm following y'all.
We got you. Make sure we get
Three
you notes.
separate bills. I got 3 separate bills in Chairman's, I got DeMay's, and I got Valderrama's. Now,
Yeah.
Flipping these pages, I'm telling
Yeah, we are.
Delegate Turner, the only one you're missing is Chris Adams' reprint. I haven't given.
oh my God.
We
Chris
lost it.
Adams,
Yeah.
I need it, Chris. I need it.
The problem with it, it's a bunch of blank pages, so it really doesn't help us out much. So,
Actually, it would help us out a great deal.
so, thank you guys for your stick-to-itiveness. We will
Okay,
wrap this up soon. I'll see everybody later. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye. Lord have